Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us again for our midweek live stream. This is our new series and new format. We have a good crowd here tonight, and we don't even have all of our regular folks that have been sort of tuning into this. We have a live studio audience. I hate to call it that. You're not. We have a bunch of us sitting here together, and it's really just a time of discussion for us here, and hopefully you can join in online with us. And we love to see your comments. Make comments. Send me emails. I do read those, and I do take them into account when we come back the following week, or if there's things where maybe something was said that you didn't agree with, talk to us. We would love to hear those comments. That's kind of what this class is about. And like I was telling you guys, I don't like to call it a class because it's not really a class. It's a discussion of things going on and how it relates to the Bible. And biblically speaking, I believe it relates a lot to the Bible prophetically. Because if you're new to any teaching that I've done, I love the prophetic things of the Bible. They just to me, they help solidify my faith. Because if the Bible devotes nearly 1/3 of itself to prophecy, then it's important. God was trying to get us to know something about the future. And most of those prophecies have come to pass already. So a lot of what we're studying now are just the very small percentage of things that are yet to come. And I do believe we're living in a day that we're seeing a lot of that unfold. So we recently, Ashton and I, Ashton's on the set, and we did a series called The Last Days. And we started this series really with all of the COVID lockdown. Because when the COVID lockdown and people weren't able to come to church as freely as they wanted, we wanted to engage you guys online and find a way to stay engaged, because we realized that for some of you, that you're going to stay at home a lot more. And so we want to give you some content that we feel like is relevant to your life today. And so what's going on today? Is there anything going on in the world today? Did anything happen, current events in the world today? No. So we might as well just pack up. Well, if we can't find enough to talk about current event-wise, which I think we will, I'm going to continue with the Bible study that we started in the book of Daniel. If we get there tonight, it's Daniel chapter 2, because Daniel chapter 2 is very relevant to current events. We will not make it through Daniel chapter 2. You've heard me over the last several weeks in our last day study, which the last day study and the current events study sort of merge together. They sort of go hand in hand. A lot of the same things, but not completely the same things. I reference Daniel 2 a lot, but we just never quite got there. Tonight, we're going to try to get our feet wet, and we might get there. We may not. If not, we'll hit it next week. So, is there anything on your mind this week that we want to talk about? I know the election, so don't say the election. We're going to get to the election, or the fact that we, as of the time of this filming, by the way, this is filmed every Thursday night at 5 o'clock. If you like these discussions, you want to be part of it, we encourage you, come on. Everybody's welcome. If you can't get here right at 5, guess what? You can still show up. We'll have seats for you right over here, and you can join the discussion. So come on and join us, but this will be live streamed next Wednesday. Hopefully, the election will be resolved by then. You know, you can have your favorite candidate, but I just hope it's resolved by then. And I don't know that it will be.
Last I read said November 23rd.
Okay. Well, we'll get to the election in a few minutes.
That's the last.
That is so far away.
They have until that long in some of the states to count their voters, their polls,
Yeah.
votes.
Well, then after that, they get to have the lawsuits.
Yeah,
So it
sure.
can be
Yeah.
longer than that.
This is an ongoing thing. So we'll jump into the election in a few minutes. Believe it or not, there's some other things going on around the world too. On the COVID front, we talked about the reason we started this whole Bible study is because everybody was locked in their homes with COVID. Well, hopefully you didn't have COVID, but because of COVID, people were scared to come out. The nation shut down. And we started this, and we've seen it have effect. I'm sure all of us in some way have been affected personally by it, whether you've had it or not. Maybe you have. If not, somebody in your family probably has. Definitely people that we know here in the church have, and even someone on our staff has had it and come through it. But this week I was kind of saddened to tell you that a guy that I have referenced in a lot of my prophetic studies, I told you I was a pre-tribulation, premillennial, and I've tried to open my mind and study other people, study what other people, commentaries and what they've had to say over the last 10 years or so for sure. And one of the guys I've really read a lot of his stuff, listened to a lot of his material. His name's Irvin Baxter. He's a post-tribulation doctrine kind of guy. Good guy. I mean, I don't have to believe and agree with everything he said, but he was a good man of God. He got COVID last week, and I started getting little email updates on him, and Tuesday he passed away from COVID. So I was kind of really bummed about that. So got to be. His name's Irvin Baxter. He's a prophecy teacher, but you know, remember his family and all the families of people affected by this. So for sure. So that was kind of a, you know, downer for sure. On top of all the other stuff going on, we just see this stuff. So that's a current event because that's something we're seeing this pandemic still. Some people are saying it's going to flare up again. We've talked about this before, is that one of the signs Jesus was talking about when he talked about, you know, pestilences, or one of the signs of Revelation when it talks about a fourth of the earth being affected by pestilence and plague and things like that. Could be. I mean, it could be leading to that. Or if nothing else, I think, I don't know that it is, but I think it is reshaping our minds and getting everybody to come together more as one, that kind of thing, and getting us with a global mindset for sure. I definitely think that. So, other stuff happening in the news. Natural disasters. I don't know if y'all have read a whole lot about this, but there's been wildfires and things going on in California, Colorado, and some of the, believe it or not, we've been so wrapped up with COVID and everything else. Those things are actually, Colorado, it says 70% of the state is in drought. In Potomac, and some of the California wildfires, they're the worst. You know, they've burned more acres this year on record than any other year. Period.
Isn't there
So-
another hurricane forming
That's a
too?
great
Yeah,
big
yeah.
one,
There's
yeah.
hurricanes. There's Zeta. Well, Zeta has already
Yeah.
happened. That was the 11th
We're back
Atlantic
to A.
It's
hurricane.
like Ida or something.
Yeah.
ETA.
And I just saw that one's forming right now, and already it's the third most on record in this year in the Atlantic Ocean, and the season's not even over.
See, I thought the hurricane season ended the end of October. It used
Yeah.
to.
No, it's November.
November,
Now
yeah.
it's November.
Because what I read today said that the season's still open, and we're already passing the third most ever. You know.
Yeah,
in the
because see,
season,
I'm
so.
from Gulfport, Mississippi, and it used to be over in October.
Yeah, yeah. So, a lot going on, you know, from that standpoint
Well,
for
on
sure.
the international field, it wasn't this week, but Turkey had one of the most disastrous earthquake, hurricane things
Yeah.
it's ever had, and is waiting for tsunamis.
See, and I'm glad you said that because so many times I've said that in this class. So many times we westernize prophecy. We think prophecy's about us. It's not. Now, when Jesus said there's going to be widespread, you know, earthquakes, famines, and drought, and all that stuff, he was talking about, I believe, you know, the wider global thing. But it's still centric to Israel. Turkey, of course, is mentioned.
I had a prophet say this, and I can't tell you the verse. He said, "When the woman with children becomes a judge, and the earth quakes," and it's a verse, and that all happened. That all happened the same time she was appointed to the Supreme Court. When a woman with children is the judge, and the earth quakes, and I can't remember what the rest of the prophecy was, but even when I think about the hair in the back of my neck stands up. I mean,
Very
he was
interesting.
talking about our time.
Oh wow, yeah. So there's definitely a lot happening on that front around the world. Jesus predicted it, Revelation. I mean, we can look in so many places for that. So that is definitely relevant today. And by the way, if you're online and you hear kids in the background, sorry, we filmed this at 5 o'clock, and so we have a daycare, and that's going to happen. So just bear with us, laugh with us sometimes. Something else in the news I wanted to just point out before we get into the stuff I know y'all want to talk about. But the temple, y'all have heard me talk a lot about the third temple. If you've tuned into this feed before, by the way, if you're tuning into this feed for the first time and you do want to hear some of what we had to say on the Last Days series, it's in our vault, and each topic is labeled right there. Go to thebridgeonline.cc, click that vault. But we did talk a lot about the third temple, and it's prophesied that so about 2,000 years ago in AD 70, there was the second temple was still standing. Now the second temple was built, if you recall, if you're part of the Bridge Church, then you'll know that we're in a series with Ezra and Nehemiah. And they go back to Jerusalem, they build the walls, and then they eventually build the temple back and all that. And so they rebuilt this temple that had already been destroyed once. And so that was the second temple. So they rebuild it. It's a smaller version. It's not as whatever. Then Herod comes along and renovates it and makes it even larger. And so that temple stood until AD 70, and it was torn down. And even that temple being torn down was a prophecy by Jesus, believe it or not. This is Matthew 24, verse 1 to 2. This is the backbone of prophecy that we've talked about a lot. It says, when Jesus went out and departed from the temple, he and his disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. And of course that was around AD 30 or somewhere around there. And 40 years later, it was destroyed. It was flattened, just like Jesus said. And so he referred to it. Now, the fact that it's going to be rebuilt was also prophesied by Jesus among many others, by Daniel, by Jesus, by Paul. John the Revelator got the vision of it. Jesus quoted it later in Matthew 24 in verse 15. He says, when you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the reader understand. And then he goes on to tell them what to do. And the abomination he's talking about is a reference back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 that we've talked about a lot. And that's dealing with the peace treaty and all this stuff. That's why when Trump started talking about all these peace treaties he's getting, with Sudan and all the others, there's 3 of them right now. And it says many others are coming. Well, eventually that peace treaty is going to lead to the fact that Israel is going to be able to build another temple. They're going to build their temple. And so the point of this, the article that I read this week, some of you may get some of the same newsletters I do. It says, here's the title. It says, Temple Priests Prepare to Serve in the Rebuilt Temple with new Training School. And so when you go on to read the articles, it says that the genetic males of Jews from the line of Aaron, which that's Exodus 18:6. If any of y'all like Old Testament reading, y'all go for it. Exodus 18:6. You can go back and read that. The priests were of the line of Aaron, and I don't know how, but they have traced all these genes back, and all of the people with those that trace back to the line of Aaron have this stamp on their DNA that deciphers them, and it's pretty amazing that they were able to do that. So those people are in training to know how to do it when they get it built. So it's not a matter of if it's going to be built; it's a matter of when it's going to be built. And the third temple is going to look a lot like the second temple, according to the Temple Institute's plans. And I've told you about that website before. It is thetempleinstitute.org. So if you want to go, never take my word for it. Go look it up yourself. That is an organization that has the plans for the new temple that will be built. Okay, and so some within Judaism, they're sort of balking at that plan because it's based on the old temple, but they'd rather it look like the Ezekiel 40 to 47 temple, and that's if you really want to study, you can go to Ezekiel 40 to 47 chapters 40. That's a lot of reading. So that's kind of going on. There's another place that's described. This is Paul. I've read this scripture a lot in this series as well. 2 Thessalonians 2. He's talking about the gathering together of the church. Now, this comes down to a rapture passage. We're not going to talk about the rapture tonight, but Paul is talking about it. He says, that gathering together, when he calls all the saints up? Well, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. The falling away, the apostate church comes first. And the man of sin is revealed. That's the Antichrist. And it says, the son of perdition who opposes and exalts himself above all that is God or who is worshipped. And so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So in other words, he has to be sitting in a temple. Well, guess what? If the temple's not there, that tells you it's got to be built, right? So that's another passage that talks about it. The most compelling one is in Revelation, because Revelation paints a picture that tells us that what we see in our day and age. And that is that the temple's going to be built, but for some reason, somehow John saw this vision of a temple, but he leaves out part of the temple. Watch this. He says, this is Revelation 11, verses 1 and 2. He says, Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar and those who worship there. But leave the outer court, which is outside of the temple, and do not measure it, for it's been given to the Gentiles, and they'll tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. Now, why would John see a vision where it says, Leave the outer courts alone? Well, if you've ever been to Israel, or you've read up on Israel, or you've seen pictures of Israel, there's no room to put the original temple on the Temple Mount because there's 2 mosques there. There's the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. And so John saw that in his vision that Jesus gave him, and he said, you're going to build a temple in the future, but it's not going to have the outer court. It's only going to be the inner part. So it's just amazing how prophecy works. That's why I love to read it and study it, because it sees where we're living right now. And it's pretty amazing. And the fact that I was reading this article, and I read articles like that all the time, where the temple, they're like on ready. They're ready to build it now, and they're ready to go. So as soon as they get the peace agreement that says they can build it, it's ready to go.
When I lived in Texas and worked with a group that has a radio station in Odessa, Midland, they brought us pictures back from Israel of the candlestick, the showbread table, the priest coat, everything's made
They
and
have
ready,
all that. You're
and
right.
they're being trained exactly how they're supposed to use it.
Absolutely.
And they have been since 1989.
Yeah.
They've been working that long.
It's pretty amazing. And now all of a sudden, I said this last week, but it took about 40 years to get two peace agreements. Well, in '79 you had one with Israel, where they had it with Egypt, and then in 1994 they had one with Jordan, and then now all of a sudden in 2020 we have three more peace agreements. Bang, bang, bang. And both the ambassador to Israel from the United States and President Trump and all of them say there's many more following. Now, when we get into the election here in just a second, does that mean they continue on, or what's going to happen with that? We'll save that discussion for just a couple of minutes later. Last thing I want to talk about, and this goes along with the election, is the word lawlessness that I've used a lot because that's still in the news. It's not stopped. Lawlessness was used by Jesus. If you look at the New King James Version, he says, "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." This is Matthew 24 when he's talking about signs of the last days again. He talks about this lawlessness, and we see it all over our country, and even this week. There's an organization, I don't know if you've read this, called Shutdown DC. That's a proper name, Shutdown. That's what they call themselves. They're marching on the White House and rioting right now. People are boarding up their businesses all across the nation, expecting unrest. And unrest has already started to a small degree. There's protests. A lot of them are somewhat peaceful, but a lot of them are already getting unruly. And there's already been arrests made in cities, Portland, New York, Minneapolis, New York, some of those bigger cities. And National Guard is on standby. I think that's good. They should be. Because we do live in a lawless time, and the love of many has grown cold. And you can see people just doing brutal, awful things, and seemingly doing it with a seared conscience. That's another prophecy from Paul talking to Timothy. It's almost like your conscience has been seared with an iron. And, I don't know what to say to that other than, if you don't have Jesus in your heart, if you don't love Jesus, then something's going to replace that. You're going to be fueled by anger, and, you're not going to know how to handle when things don't go your way. And honestly, we all have times where things don't go our way. But hopefully the love of Christ in us is what keeps us at bay, keeps us from going out and burning up people's businesses when we don't get our way. Sure. And so that's what we hope comes from these type discussions of, listen, people aren't going to agree with everything about us. We're not even all going to agree in this circle here. But we need to show the world that we can still agree to disagree on some things and still love one another through it. And that's what we have to model. But I think the question when we're talking about lawlessness as we kind of jump into this whole election thing is, what's it going to look like if Trump, what's going to happen? And, we talked about the states right now. There's 4 states that are hanging in the balance. And, what happens if Trump ekes out the win? He comes back and he because it showed that he was winning up until a couple days ago, and everybody, assumed, well, he's got a chance here. Now, all of a sudden, you look at the polls, even right before we came on tonight, this is Thursday night, about 5:30 at this point, 5:20, and, they were close. They were down, he was up on one. Now we don't even know about Georgia, and I think we're up to 98% of the vote, but they're
And
saying
at one
Fulton County.
time, they were saying
Fulton
he
County
had
could flip.
taken Georgia.
Yeah.
See, that's what I don't understand
Yeah.
is how election night, when I went to bed, it was one way. When I woke up the next
Yeah.
morning,
They're saying it's all about the mail-in voting, and that's going to change the dynamics a lot, which is what he's protesting, which is, regardless of what party you're in, I just want it to be done fairly. I'm not a sore loser as long whatever your team is, whatever
long as
it
it's
is,
fair.
as long as it's a fair fight, as long as it's done right for everybody, and this is my opinion. You guys can have your own opinions, and I'll open the floor up for your opinions. But my opinion is that, you get your vote in by the day of the thing, and that's it. And then you count those. That's fair.
Who judges fair, though?
Huh?
Who judges the word fair?
There's one. Good point. Yes,
did
ma'am.
anybody else see, I can't remember, there was like 3 or 4 different states, and it said they had so many registered voters, but then they had more actual votes than they had registered
I
votes.
read that as well. I believe that was Michigan or Minnesota. One
There
of those.
was like
That's
3
why he's filed a
states.
lawsuit there. It might have been Wisconsin.
I
It was
think
one
it
of
was
those.
both. I think
Yeah.
it was both.
Yeah, it was more than.
It's going to be hard to accept anything on either side because nobody has any trust for the other side. Like,
You're right.
Exactly.
everybody is ruining any trust.
And you know what I think's happening right now? I think the enemy is sitting wherever he's at. He's just laughing it up. He's laughing. He's
Got
like,
that
this
one, yeah.
is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to pit this side against that side and make it an us versus them. And now you're right. No matter what happens, now we can pray against that. We don't need to speak it into existence.
Right.
What I'm praying is that government, law enforcement, leaders. I hope Trump will change his tune a little bit too to calm the temper things. Of no matter what happens, calming the I'm hoping we've preempted people enough to say, well, if you come out, we've got the National Guard here, we got this there, and you're going to be arrested. And this is going to go on your I'm hoping some of that calms some of that, but I'm not sure it will, because no matter if they finally declare victory for one or the other side's going to be livid, and because it's such a close race. I wished it would have just been a blowout one way or the other. That way we could avoid it, but that was too good to be true. So, but I don't, I think there's just a lot. I made a couple of points about the election. You guys can chime in as I say these, and we'll.
Shane,
Sure.
one thing that has grounded me more in the Lord, about 3 weeks ago, I chose to start praying for the opposite candidate. And I have found that I'm a lot more at peace, and it's because I'm praying, and I'm earnestly
Right.
praying for that person.
That's excellent advice. I hope you heard that online. That to pray for somebody that's not on your team. Whether it's this or anything in life. But
Patrick
it's-
had us do that on Sunday.
Yeah, and that's excellent. I remembered hearing that. I couldn't remember if he said it or somebody else said it, but that is an excellent point. And we can have our convictions. I've got mine, and I've got strong convictions as to why I believe what I believe, and I feel firmly that I'm right. But honestly, there's people on the opposite side of the aisle that feel firmly and strong about why they believe what they believe. And it takes a sit down communication with them. It doesn't take a rant on Facebook to talk about how now you can rant all you want about that was done illegally and all that. I mean, because that's my biggest thing. It's not a matter of are conservatives or liberals going to win. It's more a matter of is our democracy holding true? Are we doing things the right way? And if the people speak, they speak. We go where the people speak. But if it's, that's kind of where I'm at. And there's nothing we can do either way if it's not, but pray for the people who did it, or pray for the people who were responsible, and pray that God would even reach them,
Well, and the
so.
saddest part of it was, I stayed up till 3:30 in the morning watching the thing, when most people were already in bed. But I was watching, and they were talking about the secrecy and people being not honest and open about it. Well, they were showing me the one in Folsom County, and while the newsreader was talking, the office was closed, everything was quiet, and yet there were men in there moving things around.
Yeah.
Now, even if I didn't believe it, I would have gotten suspicious at looking at that. Nobody's doing anything to make it look like it could be honest. Nobody's trying very hard to improve the situation. Detroit, they boarded the windows and wouldn't let them see what they were doing in the ballot box. But that's just not America. We don't do things that way.
You made a good point last week, though, when you said God puts people in authority for a reason. In the parade, which I thought was genius. He sees the front of the parade and the back of the parade. We're only seeing the front of the parade.
Right.
So, who would
Yeah.
even ask what he's doing right now? Because he already knows the end.
Exactly.
So that was a good way you put it last week.
And I want to say something I saw in my notes here, because this was brought up last week. One of the comments was made. In one of my newsletters I read this week, there was an article, and it said, it was talking about just the election and giving some thoughts. And I'm going to give some of the thoughts that person had in there, because I thought they were interesting. One of the points was charismatic prophets will either be vindicated or humiliated through this. Because there's been a lot of people that have prophesied and said that Trump is going to win again. They said, God told me. And so this person, who was one of the people that still said it, the person writing the article said, I checked with one of my friends today asking that if he remained sure of his prediction. He responded, yes. This is this week after the ballots started coming in. He said, are you still sure of your prediction? He said, yes, and then added this, there are no prophets I trust who have not also said Trump will win. I have felt confident in the chorus of mature prophets. Suppose he does lose. I would have no explanation for how everyone, including myself, missed it. Blaming it on the devil or fraud and stealing the election would seem immature or an excuse. This is the prophet talking. He said, I agree with this assessment. There has either been a spirit of mass deception poured out on these leaders, or they will be proved right. So there are people prophesying that, so they're either going to be right and God spoke through them, or they're going to be wrong and they've been part of the delusion. They've been part of the mass deception, because we can say, oh, well, they stole it from us. Well, do you think if God can see the end, God doesn't see the deception coming? Of course he does. He's like, no, if God spoke to you, he's going to win in spite of in spite of the cheating, in spite of the whatever. So if God was speaking through these people, so that's what
Can I just throw one thing out there? I did mention it last week, and the reason why I haven't been secure in who I felt was going to win. Yes, I've heard the prophets that say that Trump is going to win, and I want to believe those. And this is the thing, I do believe that all of these people have heard from God. Again, God sends visions, God sends messages, however God does it, many times to wake up the church and to give the church an opportunity to be a part of what his desire is. His desire ultimately was for the church to wake up and just absolutely, cry out to heaven for intervention, for him to do something for America. And I believe in these prophecies and in these things that's been happening is that this is what God wants. But he also said, you have a window of opportunity to appeal to heaven, basically. How many, I know there's a lot of people that have been praying, but how many, and when you look at percentage of Christians in the United States, how many of us really took it to heart? How many of us really did, or did they just be like, okay, Lord, I'm trusting you, and that's the end of their prayer life? I don't know, and that's the only reason for me that I can't feel real secure, because I have no idea what everybody else did. There could have been 75% of God's kids that cried out to heaven, and then again, there may be 35% that cried out to heaven. And you can argue all day long about the fact God's sovereign and God's going to do what God wants to do. Yes, but we all know that prayer has something to do with what happens.
right.
And that's all I'm saying, is that
Okay.
I believe very firmly that these were real prophecies that were God-given. But if he doesn't win, that doesn't mean that it did not come from God.
That gets us to some deep theological discussions there, because and I'm not gonna bend too far one way or the other, but that makes it almost look like we have to do certain things right before. God does do conditional things, but if God says this is going to happen, period. Now, if God says it in a way that says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, then I will. Okay, there's an if there. But when a prophet comes up and says, Trump's going to win, end of story, God told me, there's no if there. There's no conditional thing. That's somebody making you get what I'm saying? So there is a difference. There are conditional things where God will give conditions, but when somebody just says outright, this is what I'm telling you God has told me, that is not a conditional thing. And that's where the article was saying, even the person that was a prophet and said this, said, I agree with you. Either I was deceived or God is right, or God spoke through me. And so, but I do agree there are conditional prophecies. There are, but like the one I just quoted from 2 Chronicles, was it 2 Chronicles 7:14 when they're talking to Israel. But most of these that I'm referring to were point blank, you know what I mean? Like right in your face. I know a lot of people are itching to say something. You were going to say something.
There's a pastor, and I'm sad to say that I don't even know him and I don't remember his name. But I heard it on the news today on my phone, that actually had a vision several days ago of a scale, the scale of justice, and he had more to say, but the gist of it was this election is going to be settled in the courts.
Mhm.
And he said, I just want y'all to know that.
Right. And before we get too far into this, I want to speak this before I lose it. A good example, Krista, maybe of what you were talking about is the prophet Jonah. God says, I want you to go to preach to Nineveh. And if they repent, they'll stand as a nation. But if they don't, I'm going to send another kingdom in. Guess what? Jonah went, preached, they repented. And they were spared for a number of other years. Well, Nahum was another prophet that came behind Jonah. And he said that because they had fallen away again, preached to them, and in that time they did not repent. And guess what? The Assyrians were overtaken by, is that when they were taken over by the Babylonians? And so that is to speak to that as a conditional thing, but it was clear that it was a conditional. You know what I'm saying? It's like you preach to them when they repent. We'll do that, or even Lot when they, it's like find me some righteous people, and if there are some righteous people here, I will not condemn this city. But there were none. But then there's others just firm, firm prophecies, just like the ones we're talking about now with Ezra and Nehemiah. Guess what? You guys, I've given you chance after chance. You're going to be exiled for 70 years, and I just want you to deal with it. Don't fight back. Live in exile for 70 years, be good Jewish people, and then I'll bring you back. But that's what's going to happen, so don't even bother fighting. So God does also just give stern, straight-up prophecies as well. There are different types of prophecies. There are. So we just have to be careful and filter who we're listening to and hear what they're saying. It's easy for me. It's easy for me to give a prophecy that gives me a way out. You know what I mean? So I don't get stoned. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if you do all this, then God, So I'm just saying we do have to be careful if we're in the prophetic world. And trust me, I do believe in the prophetic world. I do. I believe in signs and wonders. I believe in Acts chapter 2. I believe that Acts chapter 2, when Peter started preaching, that there will be signs and wonders. There will be visions and dreams. We are seeing that. We see in the Muslim world people that in these nations where you can't even get a missionary in there, but yet God is supernaturally sending dreams to these people, and there's revival that's happening in these Middle Eastern countries, in places like Iran. There's tons of testimonies like that on the internet. So visions and dreams are happening. I know you're itching to say something too. I kind of got on a roll there for a minute.
Well, now in 2016, wasn't it the last hour when Trump suddenly pulled ahead and became elected? Wasn't it right down to the very end that Hillary Clinton was ahead?
He actually in 2016 got ahead a little quicker than this, if I remember right. I don't remember it lingering on like this. I think.
Well, I mean, no, but it was still the
But
last
it wasn't the
hour.
last. No, you're right. Yeah, it wasn't a leading up to it. They thought he was going to lose. You're right.
Yeah, because
exactly.
Hillary
They thought it was a
Clinton
joke. They thought it
was
a joke.
ahead all the
Yeah.
way up. And in fact, I read something that Hillary Clinton was ahead right up till, I can't remember what the time was, when a group of people in Israel started praying. As soon as those people started praying, guess who suddenly started rising to the top?
Yeah, yeah. And even talking about sort of the prophetic stuff that we mentioned last week, this person that's prophesied that in November something big's going to happen, and the riots and all that, and and it's going to. I think it even said, Krista, Mike, it's going to lap over even until the early part of next year. And that may be right. It may be right because the thing is, this could go to litigation. It could go, and it will be fought to the bitter end. I really feel like, and that's why we have to pray that the church, and for us to be the church right now, and to not get involved in the junk, and to not get involved with the, we'll have our convictions. We know why we believe what we believe, whatever your belief is, and I know most of you, and I know what your beliefs are.
So we have to be in prayer for the kingdom.
We do, and we have to rise above the rhetoric, and we have to pray for the opposite side. Pray for calm to the other side too. Pray for, Jesus said, pray for your enemies. Not that they're enemies, but they're on the other side. So that, when you look at it in that, these days they are enemies, unfortunately.
Well, we have to look at the film that Satan is doing his very best to destroy us. That's his ultimate job. And even if they don't believe in Satan, they're not even worshiping him. He uses people just like he has used me in my life when I wasn't aware that he was going to. And we've got to pray that God puts him in a can and puts the lid on it.
Yeah,
The Bible says kingdom's going to fight kingdom, right?
absolutely. infighting. There'll be infighting within kingdoms. Now, one thing I'll make a point of this article I read again. It made a few points that I liked and I thought was interesting, and that is even though there is an us versus them mentality, seems like more than ever now. But guess what? It's not as much in a sense of that we think anymore. Because one thing that happened, I think one of these radio shows I listened to made this point, that no matter what happens, win or lose, for Trump on his side, the blue wave didn't happen. In other words, it didn't just sweep through. Nothing happened. So the biggest point was pollsters should be out of a job because none of them know anything. They predicted a sweep in the Senate, a House, and the presidency, and actually the conservative side picked up votes and they held their Senate, and which tells you. And one of the biggest thing is there was a big shift in the Latino and the black vote. That in spite of the narratives that suggested otherwise, that going forward, that instead of one party seemingly being exclusive to this demographic versus the other, you see a mingling of demographics, and I think it's great, which speaks more to our country, the fact that we are intermingled with a lot of different types of people, of different walks of life, and the fact that I'm not going to be in this party just because I was born into this group or born into that group. It's more a matter of, well, what do you believe? What's your values? Well, I believe in that. I don't believe in all of it, but I believe in more of that than I believe in more of this. So it's more a matter of shifting in a sense of I'm really holding true to these values of, and it used to be you feel like the Republican side was for people, wealthier people, and the Democrat, that's the way I was raised anyway. The old Democratic Party had gone. And the Democratic Party was for the working man, but it's almost like the working man has sort of moved over to the Republican side. That's the working, sort of, you feel that way. And that's sort of the points being made, that there has been a definite shift and in spite of Trump's rhetoric, people don't like the way he talks, and I get all that, but there has been a definite shift in, he's been able to rally people that may not like him, but like what he stands for and like what he's standing up for. And so that was good to see, actually, seeing the percentages of that coming up. Even in the last 20, 30 years, it's the highest it's been on some of those. And I'm like, that's good, because I want to see people voting on something or believing in something because they believe in it, not because they feel like they were born into it. You know what I mean? Right. Think for yourselves. And I like how people are thinking for themselves a little more. So I hope that, if nothing else, from 2020, people walk away with that.
Well, Shane,
I love what the pastor said. He said, stop looking at the man and look at what the party says it stands for. Because the person's only going to do what his platform says he's going to do, and then he's only going to do what the Senate lets him do.
Right.
I have 5 friends girlfriends that I grew up with in Louisiana. We now live in different states, 4 different states, and we're getting together next week. 2 of the people are are Democrats, and 3 people are Republican. And what we have always stood on is we are not going to discuss politics at all, and we're very, very strong-willed. I mean, all 5 of us. And that's what we do. So what we do is we study the Bible, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I know we've talked about this a lot personally, and as a staff we talk about it. I know good and well what my convictions are, and I can really argue with you on why are you supporting that person or that platform. But you can easily put yourself in the shoes of someone else that was born into a different demographic environment than you were, and say, well, I believe in this because, and I'm like, yeah, but they believe in this and this and this. I get that, but they seem to be more, protective of this, which that's the narrative they've been taught, and that's why I'm glad that the narrative is most of the time false. And so it's like, think for yourself, see what they actually are doing, see what the numbers really say. What has this person actually done for that demographic of people or whatever? So that's what I'm saying is, don't listen to what a news network, I'm not even just talking about one leaning network or the other. They both lean their own ways and stuff. So even if you're a conservative, the conservatives are mad at Fox News right now because Fox News called Arizona, and Arizona's not even finished counting yet, and they called it a long time ago. So I mean, it to me, the media is an entertainment business, and they're there to entertain. and they know what their niche market is. They know who they're talking to, and so they're just going to play that up. And so, although I don't know how they decided to call that when there was still 25% of the vote out there. I was puzzled by that too. So,
You know,
and they're
Shane,
catching a lot of flack for it too.
The thing about it, there are, I have no idea what I was gonna say, sorry.
That's okay.
Well, I wanted to say thank you for sharing that, because
Yeah.
I think sometimes, and I think I hit on this a little bit last week too, but sometimes as Christians we can pigeonhole, well, if you're a Christian, you should obviously be this party. And there are just as many Christians on the other side who think, well, if you're a Christian, you should obviously be this party. And I think there are values of the kingdom in both of them. And I think there are values that are not of the kingdom in both of them. And so I love that you can model for us tonight that, that can happen, and that the kingdom crosses those divides. And, sometimes as Christians we look red and sometimes we look blue. And ultimately we still have to choose a party on voting day, but I think that there is a general respect and love that we can have for other people in opposite parties, and especially for people who are also a part of the body of Christ. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as being that I used to travel all over, and I've got pastor friends of all different denominations and all different ages. It drives me nuts when one of my friends on social media posts something, and I've seen this multiple times by a few different people. I don't know, you can absolutely not be a Christian and vote for this platform because of da-da-da-da-da. And they list it. And I'm like, oh, dude. And of course, he's looking for a conversation. And his feed's filled with hundreds of comments, and I don't even get into that. I'm like, that's just dumb. Just come on, man. I'm like Joe Biden there. Come on, man. Because I'm like, don't say that. I mean, and the funny thing is, I agree with a lot of his convictions, but I'm like, that is so anti-God right there. And this is a pastor. This is a pastor that posts that. And I'm like, how many people are going to come to your church because you posted that? You know what I mean? And how many people are now going to sit down and have a conversation with you? You could say something similar to that and word it a different way if you're going to engage in that sort of thing online. I don't. I choose to just deal with people directly if I'm going to have that conversation. But you could word it in another way that says, I'm really convicted by a party that does this. That just really convicts me. I'm really wrestling with that, or something. You know what I mean? There's a tactful way to say anything. So, but just to say you're going to hell if you vote for that platform, I'm like, come on, boy, you just alienated a bunch of people, and you'll never reach the point of having a conversation with anybody again on that side. And
Well, I guess what I was gonna say too, Shane, is that there are so many denominations, and I truly believe that for myself, I like to tell people I'm a Christian, not that I'm from the Church of God or a Baptist or a Methodist.
Right.
I feel that we need to identify with that. And I also like Paul Tripp is a pastor somewhere, I think maybe in Tennessee, and he had a wonderful discussion several months ago, and he said, okay, there are really three parties in the United States. There's the Democratic Party, there's the Republican Party, and there's the Kingdom Party. You need to act like you're from the Kingdom Party.
Yeah. I mean that's where it gets hard though, because I do feel like there's case to be made for certain leanings or whatever. But there again, somebody could argue with me the other way. So I mean, Ashton said it. Sometimes you're red, sometimes you're blue, or But I think at the end of the day, if you're smart, there's enough resources nowadays. You can cut through all the junk that entertainment news TV. That's what it is these days. It's entertainment news. You can filter through that, and you can actually look up for what each party stands for. And when you do that, hopefully the Holy Spirit will convict you and say, "Oh, now I see what the big passionate thing is about right here." But if you tell them, it's almost like if you want to get the word across to somebody, hey, if you'll tell them, they'll listen to you. They won't listen to me. It's kind of that thing. So if people discover that for themselves, so you can love them to the point of let's help them discover whatever you're trying to get them to discover, and then let them make up their own mind. Because there's enough resources for us to figure out what does this person stand for and what is this person? Let's cut through the personalities. What is their platform and what is their platform? And then at the end of the day, you pray about that, and hopefully the Holy Spirit will lead you to the right place that God wants you to go. So,
Why is it that journalists or, newscasters today feel that they can just tell you this is what is going to happen and this is how it should happen, and they're not in the 50s and 60s. They didn't do that. They just reported the news, and then you made your decision.
yeah. I think today, because unlike then, you're competing with so many other networks. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of channels. Online, even without TV, there's just so many different websites, and just the information that goes to Daniel 12 when it talks about knowledge and increase and all that stuff. We're in that time to where we have so much information given to us. So a news network now is competing with another one, and then competing with online and competing. So that's why I say they're entertainment news. They have to pick the hottest topic and just run with it until it's in the and that's no matter what side you're on. If you're a diehard conservative, we're going to sit around and watch Fox News all day and listen to what they have to say, and then we're going to be mad at them when they say something we don't want them to say. And that happens. But if you're a diehard liberal, you're going to turn on CNN and listen to them endorse everything you want them to endorse, and they will.
If you do happen to turn your TV off, say I'm taking a break, social media
Exactly.
fuels your fire again, whichever side you're
Exactly.
on. Whether it's true or not, people are believing it, and so that wasn't around in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
So you
They
can't
weren't even around
escape
in the
it.
80s and much of the 90s.
They
towards
know
the
what
end.
they know what
Yeah.
you want on your time feed, and they're going to
Yep.
put it on there and tell you exactly what you're thinking because they're listening to you and they're watching you.
And
So-
Big Brother's absolutely watching. You know what? I
Yes.
bet if I was to turn on Facebook right now, I'd have a million ads about end times or something like that because they hear
Yes.
your
Yeah,
keywords,
they sure
Uh-huh.
do.
and they do. It's amazing. We
Watch,
just-
watch the Social Dilemma on Netflix.
They were
Oh, I
talking
kn-
about,
I
I was
know.
listening to Caleb today, and they were talking about it. And they started talking about something, and she flipped on her phone, and the ad was on there that she'd
Oh,
been
yeah.
talking about. One
Yeah.
lady said she didn't even talk it. She just walked over to the counter and picked it up, and she picked up her phone, and she had the same ad as what she just purchased.
yeah.
So
It-
Big Brother is listening.
Yeah, he is. But we just live in a new way, a new age, a new time. That's why, as the church, as a staff, we're constantly trying to figure out what's the best way to engage people. That's why we're doing this online feed. I'm glad you guys are here in person. It makes it so much more fun for me. And it's fun to dialogue back and forth with people, and you guys not just listen to me, but even for the online viewers, the people that can't be here, it's a good avenue for them to be able to stay plugged into the bridge, because it's a new world, and we're trying to navigate that, and how best can we reach people, and this is just one way we're doing it, and we're always open to try to figure that out. But
But I think there's been a really good side to this election, really something that we all should all be thankful for. First of all, we started seeing organizations talk about Christian principles and get people out to vote. We saw more Christian people vote in the United States at this election than we have ever voted. We went from 30% after two elections ago to 79% this election they
Yeah.
believe elected. That's a move of God.
yeah, and thank you
that's
for
my
saying that.
responsibility.
Yeah, thank you for saying
That's-
that too, because it's easy to focus on all the negative. I mean, it's easy to. It's what's out there. We don't have a president yet that's been announced for next year. So I mean, there's a lot of negative, but there are positive things happening. And like I mentioned a while ago, I think there's a shift in demographics to where it's not about one race or one sex or whatever. It's more a matter of just merging beliefs, and that's what I think a party should be. It's like, what do you believe? What's important to you? Then you need to be in this party. What do you believe? I believe that, and then you go over here. So I think it's a good thing that shifted, and I also think it is a good thing what you were saying too. So, I mean, it's either we can have a half glass empty mentality or a half glass full. We can see this as a time for the church to have a revival, because I've spoken many times. There will be a falling away of the church. I just read a scripture earlier about that. There will be, but there will also be a revival. Some people say, well, will the church be here during that revival? And it's like, I don't know, but let's prepare as if we are. If the pre-tribulation rapture is wrong and it's a mid-trib or a pre-wrath or something like that, we need to be prepared to win people to the Lord, and that's why we keep our eye on the Middle East. And there's a lot happening. There's COVID, there's Russia, there's China, there's Iran, there's the Middle East, there's the peace covenants. A lot's going on. The earth is in labor. It is in labor right now, and it's just a matter of how far into those labor pains we are. And so when we see that peace agreement, you know how close we are.
If I didn't know that God was still on the throne, I would be terrified.
Yeah.
But I don't have to be terrified because God is on the throne and he's bigger than any of them and he's going to do what he wants to do. And the bottom line is whatever any believe, if you believe in him, that's what you ought to be believing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's going to do it. He's going to do what he wants to do.
Well, look at all the kings in the Bible that were not followers of God. And God said, no.
Yeah.
Change it. And Daniel,
Yeah,
Nebuchadnezzar.
I was going to say we're not going to get there tonight. We're going to close up in just a second. But that's if we once we start our Bible study back again. I know there's just too much going on right now, but it all ties together. Daniel chapter 2 ties to this, and Nebuchadnezzar was certainly. Some people have even tried to compare, a Trump or something like that to Nebuchadnezzar, but I think there's a better comparison with Cyrus or someone like that. But so what's God's message for us right now? While we're waiting, and hopefully by the time this posts, we'll know. But I don't think we will.
To trust in him.
Trust in him.
He's still in charge.
He's still in charge. I like that. You kind of said that. Whoever wins, Trump or Biden, God's still God, and the world's not going to stop spinning.
He's been dealing with me about the 10 virgins, that I need to know the Holy Spirit. I need to know him so well. We're on a first name basis that I'm trusting him. He's the third part of the Trinity, and he lives in me. And I don't know him as well as I know the Lord and as well as I know God. I need to meet him. So right now I'm working really hard on making him my best friend.
Yeah,
And me be his best friend.
that's good. Yeah. So as we wrap up this week and we head into the thought process for next week, again, if we get there, I'm going to let you guys dictate where the conversation goes. Honestly, what's happening in the news is going to dictate our conversation because that's the nature of this class, and we'll certainly bring the Bible right into the center of that discussion. But once we get into Bible study, it goes right to where we are because you have two diabolically different ideologies with Biden and with Trump, and we mentioned this last week. You have someone that's wanting to go more with a globalist idea, jumping on board with global agendas, and we mentioned those last week. And then you have one that's all nationalist, USA first, and all that stuff. And you can argue why one is wrong over the other. We're going to see in Daniel 2 when we study that, and if anybody wants to read that and try to make sense of it on your own, be reading it if you've never read it. It talks about this final global kingdom that comes together. It's a globalist kingdom that comes together in the final days. Daniel chapter 2 is really just the chapter, the first chapter among several in the Bible that talks about this 10-nation kingdom. That's a global kingdom where a king will rise out of it. But it says when this kingdom's formed, that's when the Ancient of Days comes and he crushes those kingdoms under his feet. And so we know that's why when we say why is that a big deal? Because when the globalist world order sort of comes together, that's the days that Jesus comes back and crushes it. Okay? So are we saying, listen, why don't we just speed it up then and just go for it? Like, well, if you want to take that approach, go ahead and just pray for the globalists to win, and Jesus will hurry up and come back. So, but you get what I'm saying. That's the two platforms you're looking at. That essentially, that's a very nutshell version of it. And so, some people have a problem with one or the other. So, but we'll look more at why the globalist mentality. Daniel chapter 2 is only part of it. We'd also have to go to Daniel 7, which we have touched on Daniel 7 some, and Revelation 13, Revelation 17. There's just a lot of scriptures we could study for several weeks on that. So, but we'll start with Daniel 2, and we'll see where it goes for now. But for tonight, I think we need to wrap up right there, stop right there, and I hope you guys will, if you enjoyed this talk, you feel like it's beneficial and encouraging. That's the whole point of this class and this discussion. We want it to be encouraging to you that no matter what's going on in this world, God is, as you said, he's still on the throne. That's a psalm that actually says that. I don't know the psalm off the top of my head. But he is still on the throne, and it's still his kingdom. And he is not surprised by anything. He's gonna have the person in authority who he wants for that season. So let's always rest in that. No matter who wins, it's God's man. So we'll need to pray for them. So you guys be blessed, and we hope to see you back next week.